Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 10. The Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is by far the most famous of all the forbidden books of the Bible. That's because the stories in the book are so outrageous, you might expect to find them in a modern fiction novel. The story revolves around Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. Yes, the same Noah who survived the Great Flood. This all takes place in the time before modern man, long before God hit the reset button and sent a flood to wipe out almost all life on the planet. At this time, humanity was new. To watch over his new creation, God sent a group of angels called the Grigori, but they are typically called the Watchers. All they were supposed to do was watch over humanity to make sure everything went according to plan. But instead, the greedy angels became attracted to human females and bred with them. This resulted in the creation of the Nephilim, a race of despicable giants. The Grigori then taught the humans and their half-breed offspring all the secrets of the universe, knowledge they weren't meant to share. It was such a debacle that the world soon devolved into chaos and sin. God was so disappointed that he cast the angels into oblivion and drowned the Nephilim in the Great Flood. There are other chapters that go on to discuss the ancient history of Israel and the revolt of the Maccabees. It even delves into the idea of final judgment. The Book of Enoch was removed from all Jewish scripture in 90 AD, meaning it hasn't been an official biblical story for almost 2,000 years. Number 9. Judith. Judith is one of the more imaginative books that was axed from the Bible. Most scholars agree the book is highly fictionalized, likely written by someone with a flair for drama. The Book of Judith is all about an invasion of Israel. The Assyrians, led by a man named Holofernes, besieged the town of Bethulia. In this town lives a widow by the name of Judith. She's frustrated by the lack of faith in God shown by her fellow townsfolk and the leaders of the city, and so she comes up with her own plan to destroy the invaders. Because her countrymen don't have enough faith in God, Judith plans to murder Holofernes herself. Her scheme involves seducing him and gaining access to his tent. Then once they're alone, she murders him under the cover of darkness. Her plan goes off without a hitch, and Judith displays the severed head of Holofernes to the city. She then tells them how it was all thanks to God. She claimed that God protected her so no sin would be used against her, and so that no shame would befall her. Thanks to her brave actions, the town's faith in God is renewed, and they're able to beat back the evil Assyrians. It's not clear why this part of the Bible was removed. Some have speculated it was because the story puts a woman in too much heroic of a light, something the church despises. Others say it's because the story is simply too dramatic to be in the Bible. Number 8. Bel and the Dragon. The tale of Bel and the Dragon only survives in one original Greek manuscript, the Codex Chisianus from the 10th century. The narrative was originally added at the end of the Book of Daniel, though nobody really knows when. It's considered canon to Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christians, but not to the Protestants. The tale begins with Daniel at the court of King Cyrus of Persia. He's an honored guest who doesn't believe in the idols being worshipped by the Persians. One of the idols is Bel, an ancient Mesopotamian god. Cyrus insists that Bel, through its clay and bronze statue, consumes the food offerings laid out for it every night. But Daniel insists that such a thing is impossible. Daniel then stakes out the room in which the statue is kept. He watches as the priests come out at night to eat the food, thereby making it look like the statue of Bel was responsible. The whole moral of the story is that worshipping false idols is wrong. But the story doesn't end there. The second part is about a dragon, one which the Persians are also worshipping. Daniel slays the dragon by feeding it a cake baked from pitch fat and hair. After the dragon eats the cake, its stomach explodes. Number 7. The Song of the Three Holy Children. The Song of the Three Holy Children is not exactly a book, but a passage which appears after the Book of Daniel in very few translations of the Bible. Some Christian denominations accept it as canonical, meaning it's an official passage in the Bible. However, many other denominations of Christianity don't see it that way. The passage itself contains three major components: The first part is a prayer uttered by Daniel's friend Abednego. In the book of Daniel, there's a story about the 3 Hebrew men thrown into a fiery furnace by the king of Babylon. After they refused to bow to the king's image, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were all thrown into a furnace to be cooked alive. The song of the 3 holy children begins with one of those men praying to God for mercy. The second part, after the prayer, describes a radiant figure appearing to the 3 men in the furnace. When the men realize they're being saved by God, they sing praise. This praise is the third and final part of the passage. In the end, the song of the 3 holy children isn't all that outrageous or controversial. But because the origin of the writing is unknown and obscure, the whole thing was cut from the Bible. Protestants wholly reject the text, while the Church of England lists it as apocryphal. Number 6. 2 Ezra. One of the 14 books removed from the English version of the Bible is 2 Ezra. It's an apocalyptic story supposedly written by a priest named Ezra in the 5th century BC. However, scholars truthfully don't know when exactly the document was written, but they think it may have been written by an unknown scholar in the decades after Jesus died in the 1st century AD. Those who consider this book a forbidden text or apocrypha are the Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and the Protestants. 2 Ezra was excluded from the Old Testament by Jerome of Stridon, or Saint Jerome, in the 4th century AD. Ever since, it's appeared here and there in certain versions of the Bible, but even then, many of its chapters are cut or clipped to fit the particular book it appears in. For example, the first 2 chapters can only be found in the Latin version of the Bible, and they are called 5 Ezra by scholars. These 2 chapters discuss how God rejects the Jewish people, a topic that's extremely controversial. Scholars generally believe these particular chapters were created much later, possibly in the 3rd century, by someone who wanted to incite anti-Semitism. The main bulk of 2 Ezra discusses a Jewish apocalypse. Ezra has 7 visions, most of which involve him having intense discussions with the archangel Uriel. In his final 3 visions, he sees an eagle with 3 heads and 20 wings, and that eagle is attacked by a lion and then burned. The eagle is likely meant to be a representation of the Babylonian kingdom being defeated by the Jewish kingdom. Then Ezra sees the Messiah breathe fire like a dragon on a crowd of non-believers, a representation of the unfaithful being obliterated at the end of days. Do you believe that giants once roamed the earth? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 5. The Wisdom of Solomon. The Wisdom of Solomon wasn't allegedly written by the mighty King Solomon himself. The early church wasn't a big believer in that theory, and instead claimed that the book was written by friends of Solomon in his honor. Modern historians say the same, and insist the book was written several centuries after King Solomon was already dead, likely around the 2nd century BC. King Solomon was a philosopher and scholar, so he did write a lot on the subject of wisdom, but nothing he wrote was ever added to the Bible. In the Wisdom of Solomon, there are things written that go directly against what's written in parts of the official Bible. For example, wisdom is referred to in terms that the Bible reserves strictly for the Messiah. Wisdom or knowledge is described as a reflection of eternal light and an image of God's goodness. This is exactly how Jesus, the Son of God, is referred to in the book of Hebrews. For Christians in the early church, these contradictions would have been unthinkable. But things get even more scandalous still. The Wisdom of Solomon claims that salvation is an act of wisdom. This is in direct violation of Scripture, which clearly states salvation is a gift from God, granted only by faith. In other words, the Bible teaches that a man cannot depend on wisdom and must only depend on God. On the other hand, the Wisdom of Solomon seems to suggest that a man can rely much more on his own wisdom and doesn't necessarily need God to be saved. Number 4. Susanna. Susanna is yet another apocryphal story removed from the Bible that revolves around a woman. Her name in the book is Susanna, and she's a wealthy Babylonian Jewish woman. A pair of judges despise her because of her wealth, and so they plot to terrorize her. They threaten to charge Susanna with adultery if she refuses to lay with them. But because of her faith in God, she's spared any violence that might come against her. She refuses the advances of the judges, and when they take her to court to accuse her, God sends Daniel to reveal the judges as evil men. The brief but powerful story was progressive especially since it was written over 2,000 years ago. But despite the book not being overly fanciful and having a moral lesson about not abusing others, it was removed from the Bible. Again, this is likely because the story centered on a strong and willful woman, something we all know the church has never been fond of. Number 3. The Book of Tobit. The Book of Tobit was likely written in the 2nd century BC. It details the story of Tobit and his family. They were exiled shortly after the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. They were then forced to live in the city of Nineveh, Assyria. While the other Jews who were exiled distanced themselves from their traditional beliefs, Tobit remained devoutly Jewish. Unlike the others, he didn't begin to worship false idols, and he didn't ignore God's laws. But for all of his devotion to God, Tobit was blinded when a sparrow flew overhead and pooped in his eyes. The story then moves to Tobit's son, Tobias. After picking up some silver talents, Tobias runs into the angel Raphael, who battles the demon Asmodeus. The demon had fallen in love with a mortal woman named Sarah, but after the demon was defeated with the help of Raphael, Tobias and Sarah got married. They then returned to Nineveh, and Tobit was cured of his blindness. The moral of the story is that one should maintain their faith in God. It's all about how God tests the faithful and protects family values. It also shows how God responds to prayers. All the same, the Protestants and the Jews consider the book apocrypha. It's widely recognized as an exciting work of fiction, but it isn't religious scripture. Number 2. The Rest of Esther. The Book of Esther is an official book in the Hebrew Bible. It's all about the story of a Hebrew woman born in Persia under the name Hadassah. She later becomes known as Esther and takes the seat as Queen of Persia. She's been credited with preventing her people from experiencing a genocide. The Rest of Esther, or the additions to Esther, are extra texts that were likely written by an Egyptian Jew around 170 BC. Scholars believe because the story of Esther wasn't quite religious enough, a Jewish person living in Egypt decided to spice things up a bit. They added new passages to give the book a more religious tone. However, the obvious differences in writing style was enough to get the additional passages cut from all official Hebrew scriptures. The additional text changes the whole tone of the book from what was originally meant to be in the Hebrew Bible. Instead of Esther being a mighty Jewish woman who saves her people, the Jewish people are spared destruction only because of their godliness. It's one of the few books that was cut from the Bible for being more religious than the original. Number 1. The Prayer of Manasseh. The Prayer of Manasseh is another one of the 14 books that were moved from the Old Testament. It contains just 15 verses and is said to be a prayer uttered to King Manasseh of Judah himself. This would have been between 697 and 642 BC. However, the text was not written until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and so it's unlikely that the book captures the king's prayer verbatim. King Manasseh was a major figure in biblical history. As the 13th king of Judah, Manasseh was considered one of the worst of them all. History tells us he was captured by the Assyrians and imprisoned in the shining city of Babylon. Only then, when all hope seemed lost, did he pray to God for mercy. The moral of the story is supposed to be that even though Manasseh was wicked and idolatrous, he prayed and repented before his death, and that was all God really wanted. And while that may seem like a good moral, the prayer goes a little off base with other Christian teachings. It goes on to say that the likes of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac should never have repented because they didn't technically sin. Because this is directly opposite of the church's teaching that all men are sinners, we can see why the church chose to remove the whole thing from the Bible. Which of these forbidden biblical texts do you think is the most interesting? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.